Hi everybody, Dr. Dan Miller, Historical Solutions LLC. I'm here to welcome you again to Americanism Redux, my stories, 1 week at a time, 250 years ago, that take us down to the day of American founding in 1776. Today we're going to do our overview, just a quick flyby and a step back for the second quarter, I think it is, of 1773, the spring, April, May, and June, and I'd like to share with you some high points to keep you in the right frame of mind and not too bogged down in the details that can sometimes happen. First, we have boiling Boston. Boiling Boston is upset because of charges of abuse and corruption against the colonial governor, Thomas Hutchinson, the lieutenant governor, Andrew Oliver, made by a variety of the new members of the Assembly that have just been elected, and they're highly motivated to advocate for colonial rights and to strip away the powers and the office of Hutchinson and Oliver. They're pushing for impeachment and removal. Yes, I said impeachment and removal. That sounds very familiar to us in the early to mid 2020s, doesn't it? Well, it's happening in the spring of 1773 in boiling Boston. And they're not going to be shy about sharing that desire and drive to impeach and remove those two officials from their imperial offices. They're going to be promoting that information and that news up and down the Atlantic seaboard. So here's something to remember. Everything you think that you know about the American Revolution on a high level, it really is starting in the spring of 1773. We have turned a page, or in my lexicon, we have rounded a bend in the river. We were going one way and now we're going to go a different way because things are now going to gain speed, gain momentum, and gain a new power that they really haven't had up until the second quarter of 1773. So on the one hand, we have this boiling Boston and boiling Massachusetts about the political crisis involving the governor and the lieutenant governor. In the shadow of that is growing another plant. There's something else growing at the same time, and we've seen it before, which is an anti-slavery movement that began in 72 and continued into early 73. Well, by the time we get to the second quarter of 73, April, May, June, it has really flourished and gotten to a point that it hasn't reached before. I'll give you a couple fast examples and reminders. There are individual men and women who are enslaved, who are petitioning the colonial legislature of Massachusetts for their freedom. There are new groups that have formed to advocate for the ending of slavery and of the slave trade. And on top of that, there are newspaper essays and speeches frequently now in the spring of 73 advocating for the end of enslavement as a way of life. Now, it's not reached the full level that we've seen in the colonial rights movement that's happening here also in the second quarter, but my gosh, it's flourishing in the shadows. So those are two things that we need to keep remembering and keep reminding ourselves that they are linked, they are connected, they are joint together. Another thing I want to mention to you, coming to the colonies, coming to Boston and New York and Philadelphia, the seaports, coming to 100 to 150 nautical miles a day, is news of a new piece of legislation enacted by the British Parliament in London, and it's called the Tea Act, and it has a companion piece called the Governing Act, and the whole purpose of it is to save a company that is considered too big to fail, the British East India Company. Now, too big to fail is a phrase I think we all recognize from today. Well, they recognized it then because they were dealing with it, and so Parliament has decided that they're going to raise money in the New World, in the colonies. They're going to raise money in order to save the British East India Company. How are they going to do it? Well, they're going to charge a particular rate per crate of tea, per box of tea, per pound of tea, per cup of tea. They're going to raise that revenue in order to save the British East India Company and its operations that are headquartered in London. That legislation, that new law, is going to encounter this environment of boiling Boston by the time it gets there, sometime in the early summer of 1773. And remember, it's 150 nautical miles a day is what this news is traveling on board ship. Finally, I want to remind you that if you're North American, now notice my words, North American. If you're North American in the spring of 1773, you're living in a life of empire and imperialism and imperial policy and the ups and downs of all of those things. Let's just do 4 quick examples across the continent. In East Florida, there's a new colony struggling to survive. It's about 8 years old. It's called New Smyrna. They're trying to replicate some of the farming products of the northern Mediterranean Sea. They're trying to replicate that in East Florida. Go a little bit farther west into the woods and the wilds of Georgia, and you have two Native American tribes, the Cherokee and the Muskogee, that have decided, in order to avoid drowning in debt to the British traders and to the colonial traders, they're giving up land. It's a land for debt swap that they hope and they pray will stop further encroachments on their land. Further west from that, in the Rio Grande Valley, you have the Tarahumara tribe that is rising up against Spanish and Catholic officials there. That's a native uprising. And further out west, you have the Dominican friars, who have just gotten permission to start their missions in Baja California. That permission has come from Spanish officials in Madrid with the approval of Catholic officials alongside. So this is the second quarter of 1773. We've turned a page, we've turned a corner, we have rounded a bend into a new situation. And so please remember that the American Revolution in many ways starts in the spring of 1773. I'm Dan Miller. I invite you to return with me to my new stories 1 week at a time, Americanism Redux. Thank you so much.